Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Arell, and we are back with Ashleigh Gibb talking about, or rather extending our conversation around thinking about this intersection of trauma and the body and spirituality. And today, what we were hoping to do is have a pretty in-depth conversation. We're working through the concept of spirituality, what that means to us, and then how that integrates or helps us make sense of our material physical form.
I like the word you use to explore. This is an
Okay.
exploration of what we're thinking at the moment. I like
In
that.
order to make sense of this intersection of spirituality and the body, Ashleigh and I have done some talking and have come to, in our own exploration of this intersection, three categories, not of measurement per se. I don't know, what word would you use? Three categories
I
of,
don't know what word I would use.
I don't know, maybe dimensions is the right word. Three
Yeah.
dimensions. Three dimensions to help us understand for ourselves even what it means to say spirituality and the body. And those dimensions are discipline, connection, and then something about connecting with or diving into this deepest part of ourselves.
Yeah. So something that a word that kind of came up for me quite regularly as we were exploring was the word intentionality. And I think for me, it was looking at the kind of relation between a spiritual discipline and how you most connect with yourself, the world around you, and possibly something greater in yourself, and how, in order to do that, it takes some level of discipline, some level of intentionality. And that's really akin to, and someone's fitness journey. So when you're going into the CrossFit gym, when you're going to work out, when you're going to create a program around your health and wellness, there is an intentionality and a discipline that is required of you. And something that we touched on, an area that I really loved exploring, was the Benedictine monks, and how they had this rule of life in their monastic communities. Everything was centered around this rule of life. The time of day they would wake up, they would dedicate themselves to meals together, community, prayer. And there was this rhythm, this really powerful rhythm that they had, and it was the way that they connected with God, and with themselves and with the community. And I really relate to that in my own fitness journey, and when I've definitely been, and how I've kind of connected that to my own recovery journey, and how, in order for it to be effective and for it to be powerful, I have had to have this discipline around it. And there's just this really sweet parallel that we drew out that was really exciting to us. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
As you were talking, I realized first we haven't really, for the audience, defined spirituality. And I was actually working on this as a concept for thinking about what is spirituality in terms of educating people, going back to being a teacher and thinking how do we help people understand what that even means. And a great mentor that I had at Union Theological Seminary was Roger Haight. And the way that Roger Haight works with spirituality is he helps people think about it as something that's greater than religious practice. So it kind of encompasses practice, discipline, if you will, and religion is one expression of exploring, to over maybe use that word, our spirituality. So a particular religion, gives you the symbol system, the rituals, maybe the structure that helps express somebody's spirituality. So, I mean, I think one thing that happens with people is that if they reject their religion, that there's this kind of instability in understanding what that means in relationship to their spiritual lives. And I can say, in my own trajectory, it's been a challenge to, without a church practice, which I do, but not regularly, in part because I spend a lot of time at a Jesuit institution, so I'm around it a lot, and sometimes on Sunday I don't want to be. So I think that has to do with my job a little bit, but the practice in terms of Jesuit practice, I'm very attached to, which maybe we can talk about that for a second. And Roger was a Jesuit, or is a Jesuit. I enjoy listening to you because the connection between the physical practice and thinking about that structure as being a spiritual discipline is really, really enticing to me. And I want to say too, like I don't do it. I mean, I think I want to do it more and think about what it means for me in terms of defining spirituality as something that connects me to some ultimate reality. And maybe that ultimate reality, some people might find it challenging to define what that means. Other people might have a pretty good religious background and define it as God. But that's a question I ask myself, and I feel like you're a teacher for me in that way in terms of thinking about it. So maybe you can just talk about what that means, that the physicality connects you to this greater reality.
Yeah, I'll just go back to kind of what you said about for a lot of people, when they disconnect from any kind of quote unquote religious practice, whether that be in a faith-based institution, it can be quite disconcerting for a lot of people, because they do feel quite shaky, and it gets them to question, well, what is spirituality to me when I'm removed from an institution or from those rituals or liturgy? And that was definitely something that that I found, and the people I was working with, they had for kind of trauma reasons, had stepped away from those institutions. And so looking at exploring what spirituality means to them and how they stay or become reconnected to that power that's greater than themselves, or whatever they identify. And I think using movement, using fitness, reconnecting with that physicality as a discipline, I think there is something really special in that. And I think the act of waking up every morning, or going to the gym in the evening, or going for a walk, or lifting weights, that is something that they know that they have to come to every day. And sometimes, and something that I think we are going to talk a little bit about, is it isn't about getting out of your body or transcending something bigger. It's actually about coming back into yourself. And I think that is, for me, the crux of what spirituality is a discipline that helps me connect with myself firstly. Because if I can't connect with my humanity and myself, then I'm going to have a hard time connecting with something that's greater than myself as well.
As you were talking, what strikes me, or what struck me, was thinking about what happens when exercise or the discipline becomes something that's actually not helpful and doesn't feed somebody's spiritual life. And we could talk about this to greater extent, what even happens in the CrossFit industry in relationship of kind of using a Christian narrative that for some people could break apart their ability to really connect to a spirituality, or their spirituality in the practice. And I'm wondering what you think about, this is a real wonder, as a coach, if you can see when there's a break between somebody using exercise as something that's actually a form of self-harm and a transition into a greater connection, and like, what does that look like?
Oh, yeah, that is a great question. And that is sometimes is a really hard line to walk. And I see it very much. So I've been in a variety of different boxes. So a box is another word for a gym that we call in the CrossFit space. And I have been in boxes that are super competitive, where there is this narrative of like, you show up, you go hard, there is no other way, you're pushing your body. And I think it's celebrated, competition is really celebrated, you really push yourself, but you can see versus boxes that I have been to, whether it's about the community, and granted, it is still about working hard. That is a really, really important core value, but you can just see the difference. And I think it's really important to kind of make that distinction in yourself, because as someone who has also used it as a numbing tool, I went into competition, and I think it was just another way to hide, an eating disorder. It was another way to hide. It was an escapism. And I think that's where you have to really know yourself. You have to understand your why behind what you're doing. And I think it's especially so for example, when I used to compete, failure was never an option. Like there was no grace for myself. I would be really frustrated if my body wouldn't do the things I wanted it to do, versus now, the way that I connect with my spirituality is through recognizing its limits, through recognizing its capacity. Like, I'm really connected with my humanity, because I know there is only so hard I can go, and I have to respect those limits while still be able to breaking through those barriers. But I do think it's about knowing yourself, and I think there is kind of this quite toxicity around really, really pushing your body until you can't go anymore, and really numbing the messages that it's trying to communicate with you. And then I think it's quite harmful. And you are seeing it a lot now in the competitive CrossFit space.
It's interesting. I think it comes back to this concept of intentionality, and intentionality in terms of, we've talked about it already, as like an intentional practice, so that we are intentional about exercising, and not exercising body, but we're intentional about employing a schedule and a pattern to the exercise, and in part of that's listening to your body, and then intentional about reflecting on how that helps you connect to something bigger than yourself, if that's again how that one identifies spirituality. And then also, I think intentionality as bringing into consciousness why and what it's doing. And I think part of that is this recognition of limits. So it's kind of pulling into consciousness, what am I doing this for? Am I using it to escape? And if so, where's the work around that? What do I need to face that's not part of physical exercise? What's working in me that needs my attention, so that experience. And I think it's like really raw. It's a physical exercise is really a raw experience. And so it's almost like, getting into the most, in one way, the most raw sense of self, which I also think is spiritual, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's something that I am really, really passionate about, because I think of, putting yourself through a really intense workout. As someone who came from a religious background of really dividing the body and the spiritual, so they were very, very deeply connected. There was this real kind of dualistic thinking that the body was bad, the spirit was good. And so it took me to come to CrossFit to really learn how to integrate that and celebrate that. And I think about, you're in the most intense workout, you're sweating, you've got ripped hands, sometimes there's bleeding on your hands. Really, you know it?
I love it, actually.
It's such a great
it's
thing.
like, I mean, then I have to stop or do whatever I need to do to protect myself, everyone.
Yeah.
But there is something about the feeling to know I've pushed myself to a limit.
And that is, for me, the epitome of my humanity, and where I started to really experience this feeling of power in my body for the first time. And you're right what you said about, you have to take care of your body. Like at some point your body's going to communicate some messages like, oh, I don't like this, I feel really stressed, or like I do have calluses that need to be tended to. And then in that moment, you are brought back to your humanity. You're not this kind of superpower that's really transcending your body. You're in it, and you're feeling all those feelings. And I think for me, that is what it means to have kind of true connection with my physicality. And for me, that's a very, very spiritual feeling for someone who has gone through years of disconnecting her body from the spiritual.
Can we land now I'm thinking about this deepest part of self and the concept of intimacy related to this. And I want to say, you know, especially for viewers that have religious upbringing, maybe we can start there and kind of get to this deepest connection, you know, where the body is the thing that helps us get to that connection. I was talking to a friend of mine about this and about the topic, and I was sharing something, you know, growing up Catholic, um, and I think this might be true through the way that we view the Eucharist as being Christ's body. I think that's one metaphor that really, in my upbringing, the body was never radically separated from anything. So my body was, I don't know, part of my religious experience and critical. And my mom is an artist. So on Good Friday, for instance, she would create rooms where we would walk through the Stations of the Cross, and they were very sensual. So what's the ice that makes the smoke? The dry ice. So
Right.
yeah, when at the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus is praying, she would have vines everywhere, and then a place to kneel, and then dry ice. So you would be in there and you couldn't quite see, and it would be warm and humid and uncomfortable. Like, and I mean, discomfort's part of all of this, right? In terms of spiritual practice, like life isn't always perfect. I think so. So when I hear people who have a different religious upbringing from me, that there is like a shame in thinking about the body and this kind of fragmentation, I really don't identify with it. And it creates a little bit of pain in me because it's something I take for granted. So it's not something I've ever felt like I need to explain to somebody, because I don't have any, there's not a disjunction for me or something that I'm combating in relationship to my religious practice and physicality, for instance. So I think maybe talking about what it means, that's so intimate. I mean, my body is I'm so intimately connected to it. And if I think about my spirituality, there's no break in it, if
Mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah. I love that that was your experience, and I think you really highlighted the word shame. And I think for I would I can only imagine what a religious practice, like growing up being that connected and that integrated with the body, how that would have just been a really incredible experience. And I think that's amazing. And I think so. I in my kind of in the past 5 years started reading Richard Rohr, and he really
Oh, yeah.
explores this idea of the Eucharist and how it's such like an embodied experience. And
Mm.
I just never, I could never grasp that initially. And for us, you know, so I came from quite an evangelical background. Um, and, you know, looking at the character of Jesus, his divinity was really elevated. Like Jesus was God, and that's amazing. And that's really powerful. But nobody ever talked about Jesus' humanity.
Mm.
And so when I was kind of trying to reconnect with my spirituality and start to question things, I was more interested in what it was like for Jesus as a human here on earth, because I can connect with that. I can understand that. I find it really difficult to grasp the divinity. And I'm actually a little bit more in touch with that as I've kind of grown in my spirituality. But looking at, you know, the pain and being in the Garden of Gethsemane, and how the descriptions around that are so human and so raw and so vulnerable, and looking at Jesus when Jesus was thirsty, when Jesus was hungry, and like that's so like carnal and so physical. And I think for me to start exploring that narrative was a really powerful thing, to then couple that with getting myself in the gym and just being in celebration of that humanity was incredible.
I really like the concept and support people watching this to think about that spirituality and our religious experiences, or how we understand religion, can actually change. Like we can actually like think about it, explore it, deepen it, change it, And there's so many tools out there religiously. I mean, we've mentioned Roger Haight, we've mentioned Richard Rohr, we've mentioned the Benedictine monks. I mean, in reading about the lives of the monks, and in a YouTube that I did, I talk about Mount Athos, which is a monastery in Greece. This documentary on Mount Athos is on Amazon, and they're making a movie actually this year. And you know, it's all men, but okay, in the Greek Orthodox faith. But I think one of the things that, you know, reverberates to me related to what you just said and the Benedictine monks has to do with the elements that bring out their intimacy with their self. And sometimes that's being alone. Sometimes that's related directly to the schedule, which includes prayer. And I think in some ways, physical exercise can be a form of prayer. I think I just want to encourage people that we're not talking about something that we find and then it becomes the answer. It becomes the thing, that this is always, I mean, I teach religion, for goodness sakes, and I'm still thinking about what is my spirituality? How do I enhance it? How do I connect to myself more and to something bigger than me more? What does that mean? What is that bigger thing? And who is God? And how do I approach what God is? How do I talk about this with my students? And I mean, I've been teaching for quite a while to still have those questions. And I when I'm teaching too, I want to facilitate the ability to ask questions and explore, because the more you learn yourself, other people, the more this vast world of possibility and connection kind of opens up to you. Anyway, that's my proselytization.
Holding spirituality. Yeah, and it's interesting because I think like the East are so much more connected to this than I think we are in the West. I think we're only just starting to really celebrate this connection to self and to body. But in the East, both in the Eastern Orthodox Church and then also in Eastern spirituality, so Buddhism, Hinduism, they are so much more connected to themselves. Obviously, you know, they've got the practice of yoga, and that's been something that they've been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And, you know, and that has migrated over to the West. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with why we are starting to question this a little bit more. But it's always been there. I think we're just a little bit more disconnected from ourselves in the West for a variety of different reasons. We're distracted. The kind of I think something to do with like the messaging of the church in the West over the 100 years and how it has been quite dualistic. But yeah, I think this is quite a new concept for me in the past, maybe 5 to 10 years, to start questioning this. So I love what you're saying and encouraging, because I think it is we're always evolving and we're always questioning. And I think for me, as someone who's really passionate about working alongside those who've experienced trauma, being able to question and to find ways to constantly reconnect with self and body is really important. And this is part of it.
As a teacher of religion, there's so much we could talk about in relationship to the East and the West and the trajectories. And I think that there are resources within the Western tradition that do similar things to the Eastern tradition. I won't go in that direction. I think you are honing in on something related to body, which is conceptualized a little bit different in Hinduism in relationship to the practice of yoga and the idea of getting your body prepared for spiritual practice. I do think that there still can be threads throughout Eastern religion that create splits, maybe not in the same way as the West, because of the Enlightenment and the bifurcation of body and soul, that's something separated. And I'll leave that. But one thing I think that's interesting to think about in relationship to how we connect to ourselves, and I personally see this so highlighted in Greek Orthodox theology, which has to do with this radical connection to the community. One of my favorite scholars in this regard is John Zizioulas, who wrote a book called Being in Community. And I mean, I love it. And it's totally Greek Orthodox theology and thinking about the community. And I think that there are traditions that we can track that have community as something really upfront and important. But there is something particular, if I can make the connection now, between thinking about the CrossFit environment as a community, as a disciplined practice that helps us connect to our deepest selves and our limitations, maybe even highlights those, but which ultimately allows us to connect to others.
Yeah, that community aspect is important. And I think it is it is what makes CrossFit. I think you take out the community and I think you've got something very, very different. And granted, CrossFit started with CrossFit.com and people started doing things in their garages by themselves. But when you enter into the community and something happens inside those four walls that is actually quite hard to articulate and it's hard to put into and I know lots of people who have been in recovery, so who've been to AA and have also found CrossFit, and there is something quite spiritual between being in a community, bringing your whole self, being vulnerable. Because I think when I see people as a coach walk in the doors of a gym, and it's their first time for some people ever being in a gym, or they've been to kind of like Globo gyms and this is their first time stepping into a CrossFit gym. And it's terrifying. It's such a vulnerable thing to do. It feels like your first day of school. For some people, they have never done any exercise within a fitness community. So you walk into that gym and you're sweating together, you're suffering together. And there's something really, really powerful about that. And I think about the growth that I watch people go through as a coach from that first day to maybe fast forward to a year. And they are so much stronger in themselves. They're so much more content with who they are. And when I have questioned the why behind that, they will say that it is down to this community of people. It's down to this community of people who accept me as I am. They accepted me as the person that walked through that door on day one. They accept me now. They accepted me in between. They encourage me. They challenge me. They question me. And I've never been afraid to be anything but myself inside those four walls. And I think it's something about the acceptance that I think then creates and sparks transformation and change, and helps you to again, then it's a cycle, because then you end up reconnecting with yourself when you feel safe in that environment. That's when I think change happens.
I think as you're talking, I'm thinking about the coach that created that environment for me the most. And if I can say Brittany Morella, I mean, she's not a coach at the gym I go to anymore. But hopefully at some point there will be some rejoinder. But I've never experienced anything like what she created with two other coaches as like a team, almost like a family. I've never experienced anything like it. And it was a good solid year and a half of realizing this community, when it is really created and you can trust the coach. And I think that's something for coaches to think about. How are they creating the ability? Like, they have a lot of influence on creating that community and fostering the ability for people to grow in the spiritual way that they're talking about and in the physical. But I've never experienced anything like what I experienced when that team was together at this gym. And when it broke apart, it was really tough for me because I've never felt anything like it in my life.
And I think, that's why you're seeing a lot of these. So you've got elite athletes who have gone through training camps. When it gets closer to the games, a lot of elite athletes will meet together. They'll train in a community, and that's great. But you're hearing a lot of professional athletes at the moment like Haley Adams, who are saying that they, Amanda Barnhart's the same too, then now and again, like it is so important for them to get back to their roots, to get back to that community, because that's where it all began for them. And you're so correct. Like I have been to gyms where there is very subpar coaching, and I don't mean like you don't have to be the most knowledgeable
Yeah.
athletic coach, like who's incredible at biomechanics. Like there's a place for that, and I respect that. But the places where I have felt most welcomed and most accepted, the second I walk in the door and the coach is like, come in, come to my community, let me get to know you, let me be curious about you. You know, oh, you can't do that. How can we adapt that for you? How can we scale? And there's no element of shame. Versus I've been in some gyms where there's quite a dominant presence. There's a lot of shame-based coaching that's happening, and you can feel the fear. And people might be getting better athletically, but spiritually, they're not growing. You know, they don't feel like there's a sense of togetherness and community, and you can really sense that. And so I think as a coach, that you have this unique ability to create change and transformation for people because you are creating this safe space. And that is not something to be held lightly. That is a huge responsibility.
So, I mean, it's a whole book on thinking about what the role is of a coach and how it's so embedded with mediating meaning for people, you know, and helping them with their physical bodies, of course, but how to understand even what that body needs and how they're together doing that. And I mean, you even said suffered together, which I think is an interesting metaphor that we can explore when we write our book. Because I think it's important to think about like what we're doing together in this community. And there's more to say in relationship to what a coach's role is, but I actually hadn't thought about it the way that we're bringing it out today until just now. And it makes me even respect more that what that work is. I think we've kind of covered the things that we wanted to cover today. There's so much more to say. There's so much more to say. And I can't wait to talk further, which we are going to do. But, you know, what would you like people to leave with in relationship to thinking about this, especially at what the gift you offer of having had experience where your body wasn't part of your physicality? Like, what would you offer people as we close out?
Yeah, I would say like this is a really, really big concept for a lot of people, and it can be quite scary. So I have taken this work into nonprofits with people that are working with survivors. And when I have suggested that there is this link between spirituality and body and movement, it's very, very, I had one person say, I don't understand how they're connected. They're very, very disconnected. And so I'd say my biggest heart for people is just to get curious initially. If you are somebody that is already in the CrossFit space, or you are, you know, in a gym or doing fitness, get curious about this and start to explore what like those messages are that your body is communicating. Explore, what do you need to deepen that connection? Do you need to be in a community that feels safe for you? You know, if you are in a CrossFit gym, look around you. Like, do you feel that the environment you're in fosters the ability to kind of go on that journey? Do you feel like it's a space where you can be vulnerable? Do you feel like it's a space where your body is welcomed? Because that's another thing that we, you know, that I think will be good to talk about, is accessibility and inclusion within the CrossFit space. And yeah, just to start to get curious, because for me, this is a journey, just like you said, you know, how you are as someone who teaches religion, you're constantly questioning. This is an area that I am really questioning. I wrote a paper about this for my master's. And as I was writing it, I had this moment of, oh, do I believe this for myself? Am I practicing this for myself? So there are still moments where I will go in the gym and I really just want to go really hard. So I feel really disconnected from my body. And I'm like, okay, why am I doing that? What am I running from? What am I trying to escape from today? What do I need to check in on? And so that kind of leads me to like get curious about your why. Why do you want to move your body? What does that mean to you? Are you trying to hide behind something? Are you trying to numb yourself for something? Get curious about that. So yeah, I think the overarching theme for me is curiosity, about accepting where you are now and seeing what you want from this.
I heard you say curiosity earlier, so I really like that's where we land in terms of thinking about being curious. And I like that as a gift for everyone to walk away from today feeling curious about how your body is your spirituality, how your body is the spiritual life, how your body gives you access to deeper meaning, and that you may have to think about that a little bit.